Aloha and welcome to the County of Hawaii Real Property Tax Division Forest Preservation and Restoration Tax Incentives for Hawaii County Landowners webinar. My name is Sebastian Wells and I'm a graduate student in the Tropical Conservation Biology and Environmental Science Master's Program at UH Hilo and will be the moderator for today's event. Before we get started, I just want to send you all a big mahalo for taking the time to join us today and for your interest in helping to preserve and restore Hawaii Island's native forests. We hope that you will find this webinar to be an educational event as we will provide you with some general information about the newly updated Native Forest Dedication Program. Before we get started, we just want to encourage you to submit any questions that you may have throughout the webinar using the Q&A tool, and that a portion of time at the end of the webinar will be dedicated to answering your questions. So just as a friendly reminder, this is where the Q&A tool is, and that's where we recommend or suggest that you submit your questions. We view the purpose of this webinar to get new information out to the community, so we would really appreciate it and encourage you to ask questions if you have them. With that being said, I would now like to introduce you to our first guest speaker, Dr. Rebecca Ostertag, who is a biology professor at the University of Hawaii at Hilo and the Associate Program Chair for the TCB ES Graduate Program, who's going to be talking about native forest dedications, who can qualify, and the value of native forest habitats.
Aloha. We are a diverse group that have worked together to support the passage of Bill 178. The scientific aspects related to restoration in this bill are based on years of research that myself and Susan Cordell and our collaborators have conducted and that have informed the development of forest categories. Leslie Cole Brooks wrote Bill 178. Sebastian Wells has written resources for landowners and for the County of Hawaii, and Lisa Miura and Keita manage the program for the County of Hawaii. Okay, now to talk about what is a native forest dedication. A forest dedication is an agreement to manage your property in a specific way for a set amount of time. In Hawaii County, we have a native forest dedication program since 2004. A dedication is a process that you as a private landowner can apply for through the County of Hawaii's Real Property Tax Division. It requires that owners provide a sound forest management plan, including indicating acreage and specific management practices to maintain and or improve the forest, including target dates and goals. In 2020, Bill 178 passed the Hawaii County Council. The bill expanded the native forest dedication. With Bill 178, there are now two types of dedications. Preservation, where you maintain your current conditions. So in this case, you would already have forest with 60% cover, or restoration, where you may not have that forest yet, but you plan to improve current conditions to develop a native dominated forest. Okay, who can qualify? You must be a private landowner with 3 or more acres, and 2.75 acres of that area must be dedicated to the forest land use. Land can be within an agricultural, residential and agricultural, family agricultural, intensive agriculture, agricultural project district, or open zoning district. And there are 2 pathways in this program. First, if you already have 60% native forest, you can do a native forest dedication. That's 60% cover of native forest. You can do a native forest dedication, and this program was the original program and is already in place. If you have a functional forest that has elements of native forest cover and non-native, non-invasive plant cover, then you could qualify for a functional forest dedication. This is new. Also new is the ability to get tax benefits for conducting restoration on your land. So if you have less than 60% native cover or even no current forest, you can apply to do restoration.
Aloha kako. My name is Susan Cordell. I'm with the U.S. Forest Service Institute of Pacific Island Forestry, and I'm here to talk to you about the value of native forests. And I'm sure all of you on this presentation today do value native forests, but I just want to remind you about how important they are. Native forests support life in many important ways. And in scientific lingo, we refer to this as ecosystem services. And these are the services that forests provide. There's many that are covered under this. Ecological, so forests provide habitat for numerous plant and animal species. And as many of you know, the flora and fauna in Hawaii is very special. It's very unique. And about 90% of it is endemic, meaning it's only found in Hawaii. Forests are a source of fresh water for the islands. They absorb excess rainfall and process water that ends up in our streams and our homes. Forests also reduce erosion and keep sediments off of the coral reefs. Forests are also very, very important culturally. They provide the backbone, and they provide the ole, the mele, the mo'elo, the chant, the song, the stories about the Hawaiian culture. They also support the collection of materials for hula and ceremony. And they also provide recreation and hunting opportunities for many. In terms of agriculture, forests harbor insects that are important for biocontrol, for healthy agricultural systems, and they provide food and non-timber forest products. In terms of economy, forests provide services that can actually be valued. And in this example, from a Nature Conservancy publication in 2003, a single watershed was valued at $7 to $14 billion.
Aloha everyone, Leslie Cole-Brooks here. I am going to walk you through the 3 types of native forest dedication categories. There have been several changes in the ordinance that are really beneficial for native forest dedication, but the addition of 2 new categories is really one of the most exciting ones. This gives property owners more strategies and tools in order to do their dedication projects. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Rebecca Ostertag and Dr. Susan Cordell and their research, which has really informed these 2 new categories. So this is science in action, which is pretty exciting. All right, so let's start with the native forest category. Now, it can be a little confusing because there's native forest dedication, which is the overall program, but there's also a native forest category. And this is the original category that's been here from the very beginning. And this is how that works. You need to have, as Becky said, at least 60% coverage of the portion that you dedicate of native species. 25% needs to be tree cover. This dedication lasts for 20 years at minimum. You can renew at the end, and we really hope that you would, but that does get recorded on your deed. It's a significant commitment, and the rate for that is at this point $7 an acre. Now, that means the assessment rate, and keep in mind, the lower the rate, the lower your taxes. So low rate is good in this case. I just want to make a little note there that that rate is tied to the lowest rate for pasture land that your property would have applied for or qualified for. And it's basically always going to be half of the pasture rate. That pasture rate might fluctuate over time, and so that $7 might fluctuate a little bit, but it just gives you a sense of what it is now. If you have market rate on your land right now, that is a significant savings. So the next category is the functional forest, and this is one of the 2 new categories that we're really excited about. The functional forest, you might also have heard the term hybrid forest or food forest, is a new strategy for property owners in order to get these dedications in place. So the coverage is still the same as the previous category. It's still 60%, but in this case, you can combine native species with non-native, non-invasive species, where at least half of that needs to be native. You can have more, and the other half can be non-native, non-invasive of that 60% coverage. The tree coverage requirement is still the same. So what does it mean to be non-native, non-invasive? This is just not your garden variety, any old non-native. This is a carefully selected, carefully vetted species that scientists have looked at and studied and have registered them on the Hawaii Pacific Weed Risk Assessment as low risk. So this means that they essentially play well with others, that they are low risk to become invasive or that they don't invade and they've been really looked at. The point here is that these carefully selected species can assist the native species in getting a good start. They can do this in a lot of ways. It really depends on your property. You might have noticed with some of these non-native species that they grow very quickly, so they can provide shade, they can provide windbreaks, they can help keep moisture in the soil, they can stick their elbows out and keep the invasives from coming in and running all over the place, and they can really help you get a start. Well, why would you do this? Why not just do the native forest category? Well, by all means, if you can do the native forest category, do. That is the gold standard. But in a lot of cases, especially on this island, the conditions might be such that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to start right away with a native forest. Look out the window right now. I don't know where you're sitting, but you might look out and you see a sea of strawberry guava kind of grinning at you through the window, right? You have a lot of work to do. You need to get rid of those invasives. That can be difficult. It might be that all your windbreaks are gone. It might be that the soil on your property is really degraded and in poor shape. As an example, I had someone come out to where I live. I was curious about the soil, and the consultant kind of scratched his head and he said, well, you actually don't have any topsoil. It all washed down to the ocean with the sugarcane industry. So in cases like this, doing a functional forest is right for you. You can use this in two different ways. It can be an endpoint, that is, you can restore to a functional forest, or perhaps you have one already, or it can be a restoration project such that it is a glide path or a stepping stone towards native forest. Either of those work, and you don't have to decide now. You can start with a restoration plan to restore to functional forest. You get a start there, there's a little more baby steps, and then maybe down the road you say, you know what, I think I can do a full-on native forest here. So you can go from one category to the next. This isn't set in stone. It's very flexible, and it just recognizes that things change and you really don't know until you get started. So this is a really exciting new category that will help a lot of us do a project that maybe otherwise might have seemed almost impossible. All right, so the third category, and this is also new, and this is kind of my personal favorite, it's called the successional forest. And this is the ultimate reforestation plan, because in order to do a successional forest, you need to have soil substrates of less than 10 centimeters. That is, you need to have lava mass on your property. So this is how the native forest got started on this island, right? It started with lava lands, and it slowly got us to where it used to be anyway. So there isn't a coverage requirement in this case because there is no coverage. What this dedication means is that you dedicate the land, and in that process, you have a plan to keep out invasives. Maybe you've got to control the ungulates. You basically are setting aside property so that it can do its part, so that man Pele, so that Mother Nature can come in and get that native forest back on track. Or not back on track, back here for the first time in this particular case. All right, you know, in this case, there is a difference in the dedication, and I just want to back up quickly with the functional forest. It's a 20-year dedication, and you'll notice that the rate is higher, and that also fluctuates. But to the successional forest, the rate in this case is a 50-year dedication. So that is a significant commitment. You might be wondering, well, why so long? Well, it's because it takes a while to get a native forest in place on lava lands. And we're serious about this. We want to see that native forest come in. This isn't just a placeholder. But on the other side of this is that this is not an assessment rate, it is a flat value. So for a successional forest dedication, it's a flat tax value of $100. So depending upon where you live, it can be a significant savings depending upon how that land is valued.
Good morning, I'm Keita Joe, the Assistant Administrator for the Real Property Tax Division. I'm going to cover a couple of slides looking at the tax implications of entering into a dedication. While the real property tax incentive will not offset all of the costs incurred by owners for the maintenance and restoration of native forests, it does provide a benefit in some cases. Here are a few examples of the types of savings that may be experienced when choosing a dedicated property for the maintenance and restoration of native forests. Tax savings will vary and is very much dependent on the market value and size of your property. So in the first example, in the upper left of your screen, is a property located in South Kona that is 6 acres in size. This property, if taxed on its $209,000 market value, will pay a little more than $1,900 in taxes annually. When assessed at a native forest value of $7 per acre, the property's taxable value drops from $209,000 to only $42. The respective taxes to be paid annually based on the $42 value would be $200. This is our minimum tax in Hawaii County. The annual savings by participating in the native forest dedication for this particular property would be $1,754.15. And the second example I have in the upper right is a property located in Hamakua that is 602 acres in size. This property, if taxed on its $3.5 million value, will pay almost $33,000 in taxes annually. When assessed at its functional forest value of $14 per acre, the property's taxable value drops from $3.5 million to about $8,400. The respective taxes to be paid annually would also be $200. Again, our minimum tax in Hawaii County. So for this particular property, the annual tax savings would be $32,571.75. The last example on this slide is a property located in South Kohala that is 22 acres in size. This property, if taxed on its almost $1.5 million market value, will pay almost $14,000 in annual taxes. When assessed at a successional forest value of $100, the property's taxable value drops from almost $1.5 million to $100. If you recall, successional forests are assessed at a flat $100 value regardless of size. The respective taxes to be paid annually based on a successional dedication would also be the minimum tax of $200. The annual tax savings under this scenario is $13,722.15. While these examples show some of the anticipated tax savings, it is important to know that not all native forest dedications will result in a tax reduction. In some cases, your participation in the program may even increase your tax liability. This next slide demonstrates this possibility. The first example is a property located in Puna and is 3 acres in size. This property, if taxed on its $21,200 market value, will pay a minimum tax of $200 annually. When assessed at a native forest value of $7 per acre, the property's taxable value of $21 would still pay a minimum tax of $200. In this scenario, participation in the native forest dedication will not result in a real property tax savings. Second example on this slide is of a property located within recently inundated Kapoho that is 5 acres in size. This property, if taxed on its $100 market value, will actually pay no taxes annually. That is because Hawaii County provides a provision when the market value of a property is less than $500, the property is not taxed. This property, when assessed at a successional forest value of $100, would still pay no taxes as the market value is less than $500. Again, in this scenario, participation in this program will not result in a real property tax savings. So it is important to understand that recently inundated lands may not benefit from a successional forest dedication because the current market value falls below the value threshold for taxation in Hawaii County. All of these examples thus far have reflected vacant land with no improvements. In cases where your property also includes your primary residence, you may be able to combine a portion of the homeowner tax benefit with the native forest dedication. However, depending on the value of your home and other buildings, combining a portion of the homeowner tax benefit with the native forest dedication may result in a higher tax liability. In other words, you may be better off from a tax liability perspective by maintaining only your homeowner's exemption and not applying for the native forest dedication. This would not prevent you from pursuing native forest preservation or restoration. It just means you would receive no tax benefit by dedicating through our office due to your unique circumstance. If you fall into this scenario or are considering building a primary residence on your property in the future, you are highly encouraged to contact the Real Property Tax Division for more information.
Okay, so I can hear the wheels turning. We've gotten a lot of good ideas. And what I want to do with this slide here is just kind of give a sense of all the different possibilities depending upon who you are and what state your property is in. Because there really is something for everyone, so long as you are zoned properly and you also have at least 3 acres contiguous that you can use for native forest dedication. So I'm going to go basically from left to right here and start with the pasture over there and the cows looking at us. Well, it might be that you have a pasture and you have no cows anymore. And that might just be a perfect time for you to consider a native forest dedication. It's possible that Real Property Tax has notified you that you can no longer take an agricultural dedication and that you're being taxed at market rate. Well, it might really make sense if you want to take that pasture that's not being used or perhaps not do pasture anymore and change that into a native forest dedication. That could really make sense tax-wise and of course for all the other benefits that you get from native forest. Down below the cows, you see, well, look at that. A lot of us have properties like that where it is just has the invasives running amok. And we want to get them out and we want to give the native forest a chance to be restored. So it might be that you're really starting from scratch. There is the restoration in this case where you can restore to a functional forest or you can restore to native forest, depending upon the particular needs of the property and what you can do. It might be that you have already decided and you're getting a start on your property. Maybe you're not planting, but maybe you're just looking to first, well, I have to keep the pigs out because they're going to come in and destroy everything. And that's the first thing that you need to do. You'll see there, that's me actually, early in the morning, still enthusiastic putting in fence posts. So it might be that you need to fence. Maybe you're starting to look at soil amendments. So things like this, the projects always involve multiple steps. You're not just going to go out and plant a tree today. It might be that you need to spend a year just getting the soil amended and you need to get fences in and whatnot. So that might be in the planning stage for you. It may be that you've already put something in and you're looking to expand it. I actually think this is a really interesting slide. If you go over 3, there's a 2, one above the other. This is a courtesy of Debbie Ward, Executive Director of the Sierra Club Hawaii chapter, and she's been walking her talk and she's got a native forest that she's doing. And I'm sorry, I don't know the exact years, but I think it's a very short amount of time. I want to say 5 in between the top picture and the bottom of just how quickly you can have success. I mean, everyone's noticed that here on this island, right? If you do things right, the nature just responds and grows in. So she's just got a fabulous start there. Or it might be far right that you are so blessed that you have a native forest already on your property. Maybe you've dedicated it already and you want to dedicate it again at the end of the period, or maybe you want to expand on that, or maybe you haven't dedicated it yet and you think you want to do that. Well, we really hope that you consider it. This property then would be protected for the period of your dedication. So there are some ideas to get you thinking about where you fall here on this chart.
So in an effort to take the guesswork out of helping landowners determine what plants they can use to meet the requirements for different native forest dedications, I developed a native, non-native, non-invasive plant species list that helps individuals determine what types of plants they can incorporate into their native forest restoration endeavors. This plant species list includes elevation and moisture regime maps to help you figure out what plant species would do best in your project area, a list of 68 native and 66 carefully selected non-native, non-invasive plant species with descriptions of each plant, their preferred growing conditions, and how to successfully cultivate each species. I also created an accompanying document with a directory of where some of the plants featured in the native plant species list can be purchased. The native plant nursery list includes an alphabetical list of Big Island nurseries that specialize in selling and distributing native plants, as well as each nursery's contact information, including the address of the business, their phone number, and an email address if it was available. Another document that was created to support the implementation of the newly updated Native Forest Dedication Program is a Native Forest Dedication Program Management Plan template, which is intended to provide landowners with a resource that they can use to help them navigate the process of qualifying for one of the native forest dedications mentioned earlier. This document includes a simple step-by-step guide on how to dedicate land to one of the 3 native forest dedications, and a management plan template that takes the guesswork out of developing your very own native forest management plan without the help of a certified natural resource manager. So here's a list of some of the additional resources that we encourage you to check out and use if you are interested in dedicating your land to native forest, with the top 3 documents being found in the forms and dedication section of the County of Hawaii Real Property Tax Office website, and the last 4 being available by following the links provided here or in the additional resources section of the plant species list.
If you plan on dedicating your property, you will need to complete a petition and management plan. The inclusion of a professional affidavit along with these documents is preferable to ensure a smooth review process. This affidavit should be from an individual in the field of natural resourcing, attesting to either the 60% coverage or the viability of the restoration plan submitted through the 20-year dedication period. These documents are due by September 1st. The next step in the process is what we consider the finding of facts. This is where the division will conduct a site inspection and as well as review the management or restoration plans submitted for its completeness and viability. This part of the process will be completed no later than December 15th. Upon approval of the dedication, a recordation fee will be requested and is payable so that the dedication can be recorded at the Bureau of Conveyances. The recordation process is intended to place any prospective purchasers in the event the property is sold during the dedication period on notice that the property is receiving a tax benefit specific to its use, which must be continued to prevent a breach of the dedication. A reduction in taxes as a result of the approved and recorded dedication will begin on July 1st. This is the beginning of the fiscal year, with the first installment of taxes due August 20th. Again, this is when you will start to see a reduction in the property tax. For properties within a native or functional forest restoration, there is an additional step of submitting a progress report every 5 years, along with a notarized affidavit attesting to the property's progress in achieving the goals established at the beginning of the dedication. While tax savings may be substantial, there are some very important considerations to make before deciding to dedicate your property. Among them, understanding the restrictions placed on the use of your property. When there is a failure to observe these restrictions, the dedication is considered breached and subject to a rollback tax. For example, in the case of preservation, if the coverage of forest species falls below 60%, this would be considered a breach of the dedication. In the case of restoration, the failure of the owner to take action on the restoration plan as originally filed would be considered a breach of the dedication as well. Other reasons that would be considered a breach include in cases where the property is rezoned to a higher use at the owner's request, if the property is subdivided into parcels less than 3 acres, in cases where a condo regime is declared with units less than 3 acres, again, if the property is sold, or if the property is not maintained according to sound land management practices. These include cases where erosion is allowed to occur unabated, invasive species are allowed to proliferate the landscape, or damage to the watershed occurs as a result of mismanagement. When a property is in breach, we process what is called a rollback tax, where all differences in the amount of taxes that were paid and those that would have been due from an assessment in the higher use are payable with a 10% penalty. So in the event a property is breached in the 10th year of dedication, all taxes should have been paid are assessed along with a 10% penalty for each of the 10 years that the property participated in the dedication. In the example below, if you recall, the 602 acre parcel in Hamakua was receiving a tax savings of over $32,000 annually by being in a functional forest dedication. We would assess an additional 10% penalty for a total rollback of almost $36,000 for each year. Let's say the property breached the dedication in its 10th year. We would calculate that breach amount going 10 years back, which would mean we would issue a bill for more than $350,000 in back taxes. It's important to understand that this example was simplified for the purposes of this presentation, but in practice, we will recalculate the taxes based on the market value for each year. So the actual breach at the as the market value of the property increases over time will be much greater than the $360,000 noted on this slide. Thankfully, there is a recognition that no matter how carefully a project is planned, something may still go wrong. So there are situations where the dedication may be canceled without rollback taxes or penalty. For example, a recognized disaster beyond the owner's control, things like rapid ohia death, lava inundation, hurricanes, to name a few. Another example is the death or severe disability of the principal owner, such that the native forest, functional forest, or successional forest maintenance or restoration is unable to continue. Keep in mind that under these two conditions, the dedication would be canceled and the benefit does not continue through the term of the original dedication. Another item I wanted to point out was for restoration plans only, land not meeting the requirements at the end of the 20-year dedication period may be assessed and taxed at market without penalty, provided that the owner has submitted the required verification and all conditions of the original restoration have been met.
Hi, this is Susan again, and I just want to talk about some additional resources in case after listening today you realize that you maybe don't fall into this program. One is the Forest Stewardship Program, and this is run out of the DLNR and Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and it provides technical and financial assistance on a cost share basis to private forest landowners. There's also another opportunity through the Conservation Innovative Grants. This is through the USDA NRCS program, and these are competitive grants that drive public and private sector innovation in resource conservation. And these projects inspire creative problem solving that boosts production on farms, ranches, and private forests, ultimately to improve water quality, soil health, and wildlife habitat.
Mahalo, everyone. I hope now that you, if you weren't already, that this webinar has really inspired you to think about your situation and property and what's your next step. Before we move on to questions, I want to just leave you with a few final thoughts. First of all, and I really don't think I need to do this, but I'm just going to because it just feels good saying it. I want to underscore our gratitude that you're here today and you're interested in doing this. And also just to repeat again how important native forests are to the entire world, to the state, and to this county. The benefits and everything they give culturally, ecologically, economically, and aesthetically. I'm reminded of a favorite tree of mine that I like to sit under, and just how much I get from being in the forest. And I think that all of you have a favorite tree or favorite trees, and just how much that means to be able to go into the forest and just to sit there and be outside in nature, how important that is. And that's what this dedication is all about. Secondly, I want to just make sure that you understand that the native forest dedication is designed to help offset the costs of native forest dedications, of their restoration or preservation projects. Will it actually pay for the cost of doing restoration or preservation? No, probably not. These can be expensive depending upon what you need to do and how you plan to go about doing it, how much work you're going to put in yourself, or you're going to hire someone, how big the property is, what the issues are. But it's definitely a step in the right direction, and in most cases, it will provide assistance, in some cases, significant assistance. Also, with the changes that have been made to the ordinance, there are now new strategies, new tools, new ways for you to engage in this program. And there's also a better assessment rates. So we see this as a huge benefit, but also requires a lot from the property owner. Finally, really just to underscore, which really, I think Keita did a great job of showing of how much the costs are, what can happen if you breach, that to say again that this is a significant commitment, that for the native forest or the functional forest, it's a 20-year commitment at minimum. We would hope you would renew. But this gets recorded at the Bureau of Conveyances on your deed. So if you sell your property, it follows the deed, and subsequent owners are beholden to that. And that's important to know about. So something just to really think about seriously. For this exceptional forest, it's a 50-year commitment. And well, we're serious about that. So again, it gets reported on the deed, and you're required to stick with it. But this is a legacy. This is a labor of love. If you do this right and succeed, which I hope that you, I think that you will, this is something that could last for 100 generations, really something that you're leaving behind for everyone. So is it worth it? Definitely. So thank you. We're going to move on to questions.
Okay, well, I'm going to open up these questions to the working group, the Native Forest Dedication Program working group. The first question that we have is, if the total property is 3 acres, will it still qualify for the tax incentive? A portion of the property will be used for dwelling.
This is Keita. I'll take this question. It's a very good question. Oftentimes, as I mentioned before, people parlay the native forest dedication along with a portion of the property that's being used for a house. In this case, the 3-acre property would still qualify for the tax incentive. However, it's important to note that in order to meet the 2.75 acre native forest criteria, that the home site dedicated to the house would not be able to be any greater than 1/4 acre, with the rest of the property being in native forest.
And the next question is, does the space taken by a gully that runs through the property be taken into the area for the 3-acre minimum?
Yes, it would be able to be taken into consideration with additional documentation to support that the gully helps to support that native forest dedication. Absolutely.
And then the next question that we have is, do the 3 acres of forest need to be contiguous?
For this particular program, yes, the 3 acres do need to be contiguous.
Okay. And if the area that will be used for reforestation currently has large mango trees that we have noticed Ope'ape'a living in, can those trees still or stay until the native trees are established and we can create habitat for them to relocate?
Yes, I would agree with that. If you're going into a reforestation plan.
That's good. And then how will the follow-up on reporting be handled? And is there a percentage required annually that must be completed?
So that goes back to the management plan that's going to be submitted, or the restoration plan that's going to be submitted. Those goals will certainly be need to be set in that management plan that's submitted to our offices, and we'll review that management plan as we go through. And in every 5 years, there's a affidavit that is required to be filed in the case of restoration. We will circle back to that plan and make sure that all of those goals and the activities associated with meeting those goals are put into place.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for your insight into that, Keita. Moving on, the next question is, the forest I have been stewarding for the last 20 years has a lot of very old, some 100+ years, eucalyptus, vivee, loquat, and other introduced species. Under all that is Climax lohia, Napaka kuahiwi, endemic to the property, hame, kolea, kopiko, palapalai, etc. I have systematically cleared and replaced the invasives. The mature invasive trees would destroy the native understory if taken down. Doubt that I will ever restore to 60% native. I had ag status until the fact that this is forest led to losing my status. Would this property qualify for the new tax status? And would this ultimately be to my advantage for tax savings? I lost an earlier appeal before this law wasn't enacted.
Without getting too specific, one thing that jumps out is the vivee. I think in this case, to be realistic, that as an invasive species would preclude the property from being dedicated under the functional forest or the native forest category. There could be a dedication in order to restore it, but the expectation at the end of the 20 years is that it does meet that 60% native forest criteria. So a very unique situation, but the program does provide that at the end of that dedication period that it meets that 60% criteria.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question that we have is, what is the maximum weed risk assessment score for the native forest functional species? So I can speak to this question. In the native plant species list, the plants that are included in this document all have a low risk designation, which falls in the category of a score of 6 or less. There are exceptions for Polynesian introductions like kukui, which has a high risk assessment. But in certain circumstances, we believe from the individual who created the weed risk assessment that kukui has colonized all of the existing areas that it can, so it will pose little harm to new areas. So to answer that question, it's a score of 6 or less for non-native functional species. The next question that we have is, how is the soil/organic matter depth measured or determined?
I don't know, and I think just using a ruler, or you can use your finger. Your finger's about 10 centimeters, I think. Stick it in the ground, and if you have that or less, you could likely qualify for the successional forest.
Perfect. Moving on, the next question is, if I restore 3 acres of native or functional forest, but my lot is surrounded by pasture and vivee forest, would that very small restoration make a difference for native species conservation, habitat, or etc.? Or would the conservation value come from maybe encouraging my neighbors to do the same? I want to open that up to Susan or Becky to speak to that one.
I would say both. You still would have value in creating habitat in your small 3 acres, but it will be more work if your neighbors are surrounding you with invasive species that may get into your property, which you're going to have to do constant maintenance. So if you convince them to also do restoration and change that, your neighbor's habitat, then that magnifies the effect. But even a small 3 acre parcel that is a better quality forest is going to provide better quality habitat for both plants and animals, and will be better than a lot of the conditions that you might have now.
And I wanted to add on to that too, that I find that your neighbors really do see what you're doing. And there's something that just happens, like maybe you don't even approach them first, but you do the work and then they get curious and you can talk to them about it. And with the pasture land, it might be that maintaining that pasture land in order to get the dedication is a lot of trouble. And then maybe the tax department has notified them that they're going to go to the market rate because they're not abiding by the requirements anymore. And then they see what you're doing. So put it in, talk to people, and I just think it's a great beginning and it will grow in a lot of cases.
And to add to that, one of our major incentives for these changes to this program is that pasture has traditionally been the cheapest tax rate, and we want to have forests being on a level playing field with pasture. And this new program allows for that. And so now you don't need to keep your land in pasture. If you really want to do forest restoration, you'd be able to do forest restoration and get a good tax rate.
It's always half the pasture rate, so now it's not, it's always, it's the lowest rate, it's the very best rate in the entire tax code, which is just really, just so exciting.
As it
That's what
should
we're
be.
doing. As it should be, absolutely.
Okay, well, the next question that we have is, can a property owned by a nonprofit qualify for these incentives?
This is Keita. I'll take the question. Yes, is the short answer. Nonprofits by all means can take advantage of the native forest dedication. However, with that being said, there might be other opportunities for a nonprofit to get another tax incentive through our office. So I would recommend contacting our office and talking to any one of our staff, and we can help you navigate your options.
Sounds good. And then the next question is, how do you turn pasture into native forest? Can you point us to information about that?
Oh, my goodness. Well, you better be ready for some work. I can tell you that. It's going to be a lot of work, but it can be done. And I think that the resources that Sebastian has created with the species selection by the area that you live would be a great first start for you to get the species that you're interested in, or that would do well on your landscape. I think one of the most important things is that you first need to get a canopy or some kind of cover in to shade out the grasses, because those are going to be the most problematic issues to restoring the landscape. And so once you get that established, then you will have a much easier time at planting underneath that canopy and getting things going. I don't know, Becky, if you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, shading out the grasses is really important. You may need to also be looking at the soil, see the degree of soil compaction, because compacted soils are going to really impede growth of a lot of things that are planted. And because you have to develop a plan, and if you really don't know what you're doing, you might think about seeking to hire a forestry professional to help you develop the plan. And that person would have the expertise to get you on your way. But it will be significant effort, and there will be cost involved to doing this kind of restoration. So this program is not paying for you to do the restoration, but it's giving you tax benefits for doing it. The slide that we had that had the two other resource programs from the Forest Stewardship and from NRCS programs, those are two programs that you as a landowner can write grants for to get some funding to help you do this. So there is possibilities to get funding that you could seek out.
And you probably really want to look into the functional forests, and that's one of the categories that was developed just for that very circumstance. In that, for instance, getting shade trees or getting tree coverage there so that the natives can really get a start. They're fast growing, right? And that's one of the attributes of these carefully selected non-native, non-invasives. So that really was one of the circumstances that we had in mind when we drafted the functional forest category. Because it's hard to start from scratch like that for all those reasons: compaction, no wind breaks, poor soil, and so forth. The functional forest is a stepping stone for you.
Well, thank you for sharing. The next question is, where on the website is a list of native nurseries? So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go over to hawaiipropertytax.com and then navigate your way to the forms. And then in the dropdown, you go to dedications. And in this dedication section, that's where you'll find all of the documents that were previously mentioned. So you'll see the petition to dedicate native forest land, the plant species list, and as well as the nursery list. So the next question is, my 10 acres is primarily planted in orchard, and only 1 acre is in native forest. Does it make sense to dedicate this 1 acre? I do not seek a change in my current $200 minimum tax status.
I'll take this question. So, certainly native forest is exceptionally important. While this particular circumstance, it would not change your tax status in terms of tax benefits. you know, it would be a labor of love in this circumstance to convert orchard into native forest. But there would not be any tax savings.
And there's a 3-acre minimum, right? So-
Yeah, so 2.75 acres, at the very least, if you were considering going into a dedication, you'd have to convert an additional 1.75 acres in order to meet that 2.75 criteria.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that, Keita. So the next question we have is, so you can't sell the property without breaching the agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct in part. So when it comes to selling a property that is considered a breach condition, you can prevent that breach if the new owner files an affidavit of continuation. And essentially that's means that the new owner is going to accept the terms of that restricted use through the completion of the original dedication. So if you sold your property in the 5th year of your dedication, the new owner would have to file that affidavit attesting that they're going to continue with the native forest dedication for the next 15 years. Otherwise, it would be considered breach.
Okay. Perfect. And then the next question we have is there a department that helps financially with invasive species removal? After planting natives, we are spending our entire day fighting invasives. This is a huge issue and needs to be addressed for homeowners. Unfortunately, it is too expensive for the average person to pay for the cleaning. Do you have any insight into that, Susan, or? Becky?
I can appreciate what you're saying, and you know, this is one of the reasons why we've been working a lot on these functional forests, because we started to feel as ecologists even defeated in trying to do restoration with a lot of effort. So it is going to be a lot of effort until you get that canopy closure, but with using the right species that work well together, you should be able to reduce the level of invasives that come in. The problem with a lot of our, not a problem, but one of the properties associated with our native forests is they tend to allow more light to come in than a lot of the invasive forests. So you're going to perhaps get a lot more light coming in, and that's going to promote invasive species in the understory. So if you can get trees growing in the canopy that do actually fill in more, you're going to have less problem removing those invasives. As far as I know, there's not a department that can help you financially with invasive removal, but maybe getting volunteer groups or, yeah, I don't know how to help you with that. It is, like Leslie said, a labor of love to do this work, and hopefully with a good plan, you can actually reduce the problematic invasives over time. Anything else to add, anybody? No.
Okay, thank you for that, Susan. The next question is 2.75 acres is the minimum dedication regardless of the size of the property, as long as the property is 3+ acres. Is that
That's
correct? Yeah. Okay. So this question was kind of talked about earlier. Follow up on how is the soil organic matter depth determined? Not soil maps.
That's actually an interesting question that we do kind of need to think about, because even on a successional forest, you might have areas that have no soil or areas that may have 12 centimeters of soil. So perhaps a sort of average across the landscape of what the soil depth is could be taken into account for that. But the idea is really that these are young lava substrates, and that you can set aside for these successional forests. So a soil map wouldn't be refined enough to give you that information. So I think that it would have to be just documented and notarized. Is that correct, Keita?
Yeah.
Okay. We just have a couple more questions left. First one is, how is the 60% cover determined?
The 60% cover is just an area determination. So 60% of the area that is being dedicated has to be covered either in the native or functional forest. So for example, if you take that 3 acre as an example, 60% of 3 acres is 1.8 acres. So from an area perspective, 1.8 acres would need to be covered by native forest, functional forest species.
And when you say coverage, you mean the canopy, right? So for instance, if you had a ohia tree, the coverage would be if you were to draw a line around the shadow that the canopy would put on the, because I was trying to figure that out, like, well, what does that mean? So if you sort of did a line around the shade that was provided, that would be the percentage of the cover by each individual plant species.
Yeah, so it'd be the footprint of
Yeah.
that tree coverage. Again, you're with the native forest functional forest, you're parlaying that tree coverage along with the understory to meet that 60% across the board.
And then the last question that we have is, could you do corridors of forest in pastures? Would it have to take up 60% of each TMK?
Yeah, you could.
Okay.
Yeah, if you met the criteria, and you had a large pasture, you could create a corridor that's contiguous and meet that criteria.
Mhm. And it would have to take up the 60% of each TMK, each
Yes.
corridor.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Any
Perfect.
other questions?
Do we have any other questions at this time? We have a couple minutes left. Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything popping up in the question box. Unfortunately, our scheduled time for this webinar is coming to an end. But before we finish, on behalf of myself and the rest of the individuals who make up the Native Forest Dedication Program Working Group, we would like to extend a very sincere and heartfelt mahalo to all of you for joining us today and for your interest in doing your part to help preserve and restore Hawaii Island's native forest habitats. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to the staff at the Hawaii County Real Property Tax Division offices in Hilo or in Kona. Visit their website at www.hawaiipropertytax.com or send them an email at cohrpt@co.hawaii.hi.us. Again, mahalo nui loa for joining us, and we wish you the very best of luck on your native forest restoration endeavors. Aloha.